Marcus wiped the grease from his hands with a worn cloth, the familiar smell of motor oil and metal filling his nostrils. The small auto repair shop he owned had seen better days, but it kept food on the table for him and his 8-year-old daughter, Emma. The walls were lined with tools he'd collected over 20 years of fixing everything from family sedans to delivery trucks. This wasn't the life he'd imagined when he first became a father, but it was honest work, and it meant he could pick Emma up from school every day at 3:30 sharp. The morning had started like any other. Emma had eaten her cereal while asking him about the different sounds engines make, her curiosity endless when it came to understanding how things worked. She had her mother's bright eyes and quick mind, though Sarah had been gone for 3 years now. Cancer had taken her swiftly, leaving Marcus to navigate single parenthood while keeping his struggling business afloat. Some days were harder than others, but Emma's laugh could brighten even his darkest moments. As Marcus prepared to close the shop for lunch, he heard the screech of tires and the wail of sirens growing louder. Through his shop window, he watched an ambulance racing down the main street, its red and white lights flashing urgently. The vehicle suddenly began to slow, then pulled into his parking lot with a hiss of brakes. The engine made a grinding noise that Marcus recognized immediately as serious trouble. 2 paramedics jumped out, their faces tense with worry. The older one, a woman with graying hair pulled back in a ponytail, approached Marcus quickly. "Sir, we've got a critical patient inside and our engine just started making that noise. We're only 5 minutes from the hospital, but I don't think we'll make it." Marcus didn't hesitate. He grabbed his emergency toolkit and followed them to the ambulance. Inside, a man in an expensive suit lay unconscious on the stretcher, an oxygen mask covering his face. His breathing was shallow, and the heart monitor showed an irregular rhythm. The younger paramedic was adjusting an IV drip, his hand steady, despite the urgency of the situation. "What happened to him?" Marcus asked as he lifted the hood of the ambulance. "Heart attack during a business meeting downtown," the female paramedic replied. "He needs surgery immediately, but if this ambulance breaks down—" She didn't finish the sentence, but Marcus understood. Every second counted. The engine bay revealed the problem quickly. The alternator belt had snapped, and the engine was overheating. Without the belt, the cooling system couldn't function properly, and the electrical system would soon fail completely. It was a repair that would normally take an hour in his shop, but Marcus knew they didn't have that kind of time. "I can fix this," he said, already reaching for his tools. "But you need to keep that patient stable for about 10 minutes. The paramedics exchanged glances. 10 minutes felt like an eternity, when someone's life hung in the balance, but they had no other choice. The nearest backup ambulance was at least 15 minutes away, and their patient couldn't wait that long. Marcus worked with the speed and precision that came from decades of experience. His hands moved automatically, removing the damaged belt and installing a replacement from his emergency kit. The engine compartment was cramped and hot, making the work difficult, but he pushed through the discomfort. Behind him, he could hear the steady beep of medical equipment and the quiet, professional voices of the paramedics as they monitored their patient. "How's he doing?" Marcus called out as he tightened the final bolt. "Holding steady, but we really need to get moving," came the reply. Marcus closed the hood and wiped his hands. "Try it now!" The engine roared to life, running smooth and strong. The paramedics didn't waste time with lengthy thanks. Within seconds, they were back on the road, sirens wailing as they raced toward the hospital. Marcus watched them disappear around the corner, hoping he'd done enough to make a difference. He spent the rest of the afternoon wondering about the man in the ambulance. Would he survive the surgery? Did he have a family waiting for him at the hospital? Marcus had seen the expensive watch on the man's wrist and the quality of his suit, suggesting he was someone important in the business world. But in that moment, lying unconscious in an ambulance, he was just another human being fighting for his life. When Emma came home from school that evening, she found her father quieter than usual. She climbed onto his lap as he sat in his favorite chair, and he told her about his day, explaining how sometimes people need help in unexpected ways. "Did the man get better, Daddy?" Emma asked, her small hand resting on his arm. "I hope so, sweetheart," Marcus replied, kissing the top of her head. "I really hope so." Neither of them could have imagined how that single act of kindness would change their lives forever, or that the unconscious man in the expensive suit would soon become the most important person in their story. Sometimes the most significant moments in our lives happen without fanfare, in the space between heartbeats when we simply choose to help another human being in need. 3 weeks passed without Marcus giving much thought to the ambulance repair. Life returned to its familiar rhythm of school drop-offs, oil changes, and bedtime stories. The incident had become just another memory filed away with countless other repairs until the day a black sedan pulled into his parking lot. The car was pristine, its paint gleaming under the afternoon sun. Marcus had been working on Mrs. Henderson's old Toyota when he noticed the sedan's driver stepping out. The man wore a tailored gray suit and moved with the confidence of someone accustomed to being in charge. He wasn't someone Marcus recognized. From the neighborhood. "Excuse me," the man called out, approaching the garage. "Are you the owner of this shop?" Marcus wiped his hands on his coveralls and nodded. "That's right. Marcus Thompson. What can I help you with?" The man extended his hand with a firm grip. "Robert Chen. I'm looking for the mechanic who repaired an ambulance about 3 weeks ago. The paramedics described this location, and a man matching your description." Recognition dawned slowly on Marcus's face. "That was you in the ambulance. The heart attack patient?" Robert's expression softened, and for the first time Marcus noticed the slight pallor that suggested recent illness. "Yes, that was me. I spent 2 weeks in the hospital and another week recovering at home. The doctor said if that ambulance had broken down, even for a few minutes, I might not have survived the surgery." Marcus felt a strange mix of relief and awkwardness. He'd helped save a life, but he'd never expected to see the man again. "I'm glad you're okay. How did you find me?" "I made some inquiries," Robert said, glancing around the modest shop. "I wanted to thank you properly and to ask you something important. Do you mind if we sit down somewhere and talk?" They walked to Marcus's small office at the back of the shop, a cramped space filled with invoices, parts catalogs, and Emma's drawings taped to the walls. Robert's eyes lingered on a crayon picture of a father and daughter holding hands under a rainbow. "Your daughter?" Robert asked. "Emma. She's 8. Marcus settled into his desk chair. "She's the reason I do everything I do." Robert nodded thoughtfully. "I have 3 children myself. 2 are in college now, and my youngest is starting high school. I understand that motivation completely." He paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. "Marcus, what you did that day went far beyond what anyone could have expected. You didn't just fix a broken ambulance. You saved my life without knowing anything about who I was or whether I could even pay you back." Marcus shifted uncomfortably. "Anyone would have done the same thing." "No," Robert said firmly. "They wouldn't have. I've learned something about human nature in my years in business. Most people hesitate. They calculate the risk, the cost, the inconvenience. You didn't hesitate at all." Through the office window, Marcus could see Emma's school bus approaching. He glanced at his watch, realizing their conversation would need to be brief. "Mr. Chen, I appreciate you coming by, but I need to get my daughter soon." Robert smiled. "Of course. But before I go, I want you to know who I am, and why your quick thinking that day matters more than you realize." He reached into his jacket and pulled out a business card. Marcus read it twice before the words fully registered. Robert Chen, Chief Executive Officer, Pacific Motors Corporation. Marcus had heard of Pacific Motors. Everyone in the automotive world had. They were one of the largest car manufacturers in the country, known for their innovative electric vehicles and commitment to sustainable transportation. Their corporate headquarters was only 50 miles away, though it might as well have been on another planet from Marcus's small repair shop. "You run Pacific Motors?" Marcus asked, still processing the information. "I founded it 25 years ago in my garage, actually not too different from this place," Robert said, gesturing around the modest office. "I started by converting gasoline engines to run on alternative fuels, then moved into electric vehicle development. Today we employ over 15,000 people and produce some of the most advanced cars in the world." Marcus sat back in his chair, overwhelmed. The man whose life he'd helped save wasn't just wealthy. He was one of the most influential people in the automotive industry. "The reason I'm telling you this," Robert continued, "is because I want to offer you something. Pacific Motors is always looking for skilled mechanics who understand both traditional automotive repair and emerging technologies. Your quick thinking and expertise that day told me everything I need to know about your abilities." Emma's voice, calling Daddy from the front of the shop, interrupted their conversation. Marcus excused himself and went to greet his daughter, who immediately began telling him about her day at school. Robert watched through the office window as father and daughter embraced, noting the obvious love and care between them. When Marcus returned, Robert was studying Emma's drawings on the wall. "She's artistic," he observed. "Takes after her mother in that way," Marcus said softly. "Sarah was always creative. She could see beauty in things that others missed." Robert turned back to him. "Marcus, I'd like to invite you and Emma to visit Pacific Motors next weekend. I want to show you what we're working on, and I want to discuss a proposition that could change both your lives." Marcus felt his heart racing. An opportunity with Pacific Motors could mean financial security for Emma's future, college tuition, a house in a better neighborhood. But it could also mean leaving behind everything familiar, taking risks he wasn't sure he was ready for. "I don't know what to say," Marcus admitted. "Don't say anything yet," Robert replied, standing to leave. "Just think about it. Sometimes the biggest opportunities come disguised as simple moments of kindness." He paused at the door. "That ambulance repair saved my life, Marcus. Now I'd like the chance to change yours." As the black sedan disappeared down the street, Marcus stood in his garage, business card in hand, wondering if his life was about to take an unexpected turn. The Pacific Motors headquarters rose from the landscape like a vision of the future. Glass and steel towers reflected the morning sun, while electric vehicles moved silently through the parking areas. Emma pressed her face against the car window, her eyes wide with wonder as they approached the main entrance. "Daddy, it looks like something from a movie," she whispered. Marcus felt equally amazed, though he tried to hide his nervousness. He'd spent the week researching Pacific Motors, learning about their innovative manufacturing processes and their commitment to environmental sustainability. The company had revolutionized the electric vehicle industry, and now he was about to walk through their doors as Robert Chen's personal guest. Robert met them in the lobby, dressed casually in slacks and a polo shirt, looking healthier than he had the previous week. His smile was genuine as he greeted Emma, kneeling down to her level. "You must be the famous Emma I've heard so much about," he said. "Your dad tells me you're interested in how things work." Emma nodded shyly. Then her curiosity overcame her reserve. "Is it true you make cars that don't need gas?" "Would you like to see for yourself?" Robert asked, standing and gesturing toward the elevator. "We have some pretty amazing things to show you." The tour began in the design studio, where teams of engineers and artists worked together creating the cars of tomorrow. Emma marveled at the clay models and computer simulations, asking questions that impressed even the seasoned designers. Marcus watched his daughter's excitement and felt a surge of pride mixed with uncertainty about what this opportunity might mean for their future. "The key to everything we do here," Robert explained as they walked through the manufacturing floor, "is understanding that innovation comes from combining traditional knowledge with new possibilities. We need people who understand how engines have always worked, but who can also imagine how they might work differently." They stopped beside a production line, where workers were installing battery packs into sleek electric sedans. The precision and coordination required reminded Marcus of a carefully choreographed dance, each person playing their part in creating something larger than themselves. "Mr. Chen," Marcus said during a quiet moment while Emma was examining a robotic assembly arm, "I need to be honest with you. I'm flattered by your interest, but I'm not sure I'm the right person for whatever you have in mind. I fix broken cars in a small shop. This," he gestured around the sophisticated facility, "this is beyond anything I've ever experienced." Robert studied him carefully. "Can I tell you something about the day you saved my life? The paramedics later told me that most mechanics would have spent time diagnosing the problem. Maybe would have insisted on towing the ambulance to a proper garage. You looked at a complex situation and immediately saw the simple solution. That's not a skill you learn in school, Marcus. That's intuition combined with experience. They moved to Robert's office, which occupied a corner of the top floor with panoramic views of the surrounding valley. Despite its size and elegance, the space felt surprisingly personal, filled with family photographs and mementos from Pacific Motors' early days. Emma had fallen asleep in one of the comfortable chairs, exhausted by the excitement of the morning. Robert lowered his voice as he continued their conversation. "I want to offer you a position as head of our Service Innovation Department," he said. "It's a new division we're creating to bridge the gap between traditional automotive service and the needs of electric vehicle owners. Many mechanics are intimidated by electric cars, but customers still need someone who understands both the technology and the practical aspects of keeping their vehicles running." Marcus felt his breath catch. The title alone suggested a level of responsibility he'd never imagined. "I don't have any experience with electric vehicles. You'd learn. We'd provide all the training you need, and you'd have a team of engineers to support you. But more importantly, you'd bring something we can't teach: the ability to connect with customers, to understand their real needs, and to find practical solutions quickly." The salary Robert mentioned was more than Marcus made in 2 years at his current shop. It would mean Emma could attend the best schools, take music lessons, go to college without worrying about student loans. It would mean security and opportunities he'd never dreamed of providing for her. "There's something else," Robert continued. "The position would require relocating to this area. We'd help you find a house, and there's an excellent school district nearby. Emma would have access to programs in science and technology that might nurture her obvious curiosity about how things work." Marcus looked out the window at the sprawling facility below, trying to imagine himself as part of this corporate world. The opportunity was incredible, but it also meant leaving behind everything familiar, stepping into a role where he might fail spectacularly. "I can see you're worried," Robert observed. "Let me ask you this. When you saw that ambulance pull into your parking lot, did you stop to think about whether you were qualified to help?" "No," Marcus admitted. "I just saw someone who needed help." "Exactly. And that's the quality I need most in the person who runs this department. Technical skills can be taught, but character can't be." Robert leaned back in his chair. "I'm not asking for an answer today. Take some time to think about it. Talk to Emma about what it might mean for both of you." As if summoned by the sound of her name, Emma stirred in her chair, blinking sleepily. "Are we still at the car place?" she asked. Robert smiled. "We are indeed. What did you think of everything you saw today?" Emma considered the question with the seriousness she brought to all important matters. "I think," she said slowly, "that this would be a good place for Daddy to work. Everyone here seems really smart, and they're making things that help the world." Marcus felt his heart tighten. Even at 8 years old, Emma had an intuitive understanding of what this opportunity could mean. As they prepared to leave, Robert walked them to the parking garage, where he showed them the latest Pacific Motors model, a family sedan with technology that seemed borrowed from science fiction. "Whatever you decide," Robert said as they shook hands goodbye, "know that you've already made a difference in more lives than you realize. That ambulance repair wasn't just about saving one person. It was about preserving someone who employs thousands of people, whose innovations help protect the environment, whose work touches countless lives in ways both seen and unseen." Driving home, Marcus glanced in the rearview mirror at Emma, who had fallen asleep again, clutching a small model car that Robert had given her. The weight of the decision ahead felt enormous, but for the first time in years, Marcus allowed himself to imagine a future filled with possibilities he'd never dared to dream. The decision consumed Marcus's thoughts for days. He found himself lying awake at night, weighing the security of his familiar life against the promise of something extraordinary. Emma seemed to sense his internal struggle, often catching him, staring into space during dinner or while helping her with homework. "Daddy, are we going to move to the car place?" she asked one evening as he tucked her into bed. Marcus sat on the edge of her mattress, smoothing her hair. "Would you want to?" It would mean leaving this house, your school, your friends here? Emma considered this with the thoughtfulness that never ceased to amaze him. I would miss Jenny and Mrs. Patterson, she said, referring to her best friend and favorite teacher. But I think Mommy would want us to go. The mention of Sarah caught Marcus off guard. Why do you say that, sweetheart? Because Mommy always said you were meant to do big things, Emma replied simply. She told me once that you had magic hands that could fix anything, and that someday everyone would know how special you are. Marcus felt tears threatening to spill over. Sarah had always believed in him more than he believed in himself, encouraging his dreams even when they seemed impossible. She would have loved the idea of him taking this leap of faith. The next morning brought unexpected news that would make his decision even more complicated. Tom Bradley, who owned the auto parts store down the street, stopped by with a concerned expression. Marcus, I hate to be the bearer of bad news, Tom said, settling into the chair across from Marcus's desk. But I heard something at the city planning meeting last night that you need to know about. Marcus set down the invoice he'd been reviewing and gave Tom his full attention. They're planning to redevelop this entire block, Tom continued. Apparently, some big retail chain wants to build a shopping complex here. The city council is calling it urban renewal, but it means all the small businesses on this street will have to relocate or close. The news hit Marcus like a physical blow. This shop wasn't just his livelihood, it was the foundation of everything he'd built since Sarah's death. It was where he'd taught Emma to change oil, where regular customers had become like family, where he'd created a sense of stability in an uncertain world. When? Marcus asked quietly. They're saying 18 months, maybe 2 years before construction starts. But Marcus, you know how these things go. Once they decide to push us out, they'll find ways to make operating here more and more difficult. After Tom left, Marcus sat alone in his shop, surrounded by the tools and memories of 20 years in business. The irony wasn't lost on him that the universe seemed to be pushing him toward Robert Chen's offer, just as his current life was being threatened by forces beyond his control. That evening, he called Robert and asked if they could meet for coffee. They chose a small diner halfway between Marcus's shop and Pacific Motors, a neutral ground where they could talk openly. I've been thinking about your offer, Marcus began after they'd ordered. And I have to admit, part of me is terrified by the idea of working for a major corporation. I've been my own boss for so long, I'm not sure I'd fit into that kind of environment. Robert nodded understandingly. I felt the same way when Pacific Motors grew beyond what I could manage alone. There's something both exciting and frightening about giving up complete control in exchange for greater possibilities. Marcus told him about the redevelopment news, and Robert listened without trying to use it as leverage. Instead, he seemed genuinely concerned about the impact on Marcus and the other small business owners. Change is never easy, Robert said finally, but sometimes it's the universe's way of telling us we're ready for something bigger than what we've been settling for. Over the next hour, Robert painted a picture of what Marcus's role would actually involve. Rather than being lost in a corporate hierarchy, he would have significant autonomy to build his department from the ground up. He would travel to dealerships around the country, training mechanics and solving problems that traditional corporate thinking couldn't address. The truth is, Robert admitted, Pacific Motors is struggling with customer service in ways that our engineering brilliance can't solve. We can build amazing cars, but we haven't figured out how to make people feel confident about maintaining them. We need someone who understands the customer's perspective, who can bridge the gap between cutting-edge technology and old-fashioned trust. As they talked, Marcus began to see how his years of experience dealing with worried car owners, explaining complex problems in simple terms, and finding creative solutions could translate into this new role. He wouldn't be abandoning his core skills. He would be applying them in ways that could help thousands of people instead of dozens. There's something else I want to show you, Robert said, pulling out his phone. He scrolled through photos until he found what he was looking for. This is the house Pacific Motors keeps for relocating executives. It's been empty for months, and it could be yours as part of the compensation package. The house in the photo was beautiful, a two-story colonial with a wraparound porch and a yard large enough for Emma to play in safely. It was the kind of home Marcus had always imagined providing for his family, but had never thought he could afford. The school district there is exceptional, Robert continued. They have programs for gifted children, advanced science courses, even partnerships with local colleges. Emma could thrive there. Marcus stared at the photo, imagining Emma running through that yard, having friends over for birthday parties, growing up with opportunities he'd never had. The vision was almost too perfect to believe. I need to ask Emma what she really thinks, Marcus said finally. This affects her as much as it affects me. Robert smiled. Of course. And Marcus, whatever you decide, I want you to know that meeting you has reminded me why I started Pacific Motors in the first place. It wasn't about building a corporate empire. It was about using innovation to help people live better lives. Driving home, that night Marcus felt something shifting inside him. The fear was still there, but it was being balanced by excitement about possibilities he was finally allowing himself to consider. Sarah had always told him that courage wasn't the absence of fear. It was feeling the fear and moving forward anyway. When he tucked Emma into bed that night, she looked up at him with eyes that seemed older than her 8 years. "Daddy," she said softly, "I think we should go to the car place. I think it's time for our adventure to begin." Marcus kissed her forehead, realizing that his daughter had always understood what it had taken him weeks to figure out. Sometimes the biggest risk is not taking any risk at all. The transformation happened faster than Marcus had ever imagined possible. Within 6 weeks of accepting Robert's offer, he found himself standing in a spacious office at Pacific Motors, watching as workers installed the nameplate that would mark his new identity, Marcus Thompson, Director of Service Innovation. The past month had been a whirlwind of change. Selling his shop had been both heartbreaking and liberating, like closing one chapter of his life to begin another. Several of his longtime customers had followed him to Pacific Motors, curious to see how their trusted mechanic would adapt to the corporate world. Mrs. Henderson, whose ancient Toyota he'd kept running for 15 years, had even purchased her first electric vehicle specifically because she trusted Marcus's judgment. Emma had adjusted to their new life with the resilience that children possess when they feel secure in their parents' love. The house Robert had shown them in the photo was even better in reality, with a kitchen that filled with morning sunlight and a backyard where Emma could practice the soccer skills she was learning in her new school. Her bedroom was twice the size of their old house, and she'd spent hours arranging her books and toys in the built-in shelves. "It feels like a dollhouse, but for real people," she'd told Marcus on their first night, and he'd understood exactly what she meant. The work itself proved both challenging and rewarding in ways Marcus hadn't anticipated. His first major project involved developing a training program for mechanics who were intimidated by electric vehicle technology. Drawing on his own initial fears, he created workshops that emphasized the similarities between traditional and electric systems rather than the differences. "A motor is still a motor," he would tell nervous technicians. "It still converts energy into motion. The energy source might be different, but the fundamental principles remain the same." His approach resonated with mechanics across the country who had been struggling to adapt to the changing automotive landscape. Within months, Pacific Motors' customer satisfaction scores for service issues improved dramatically, and dealerships reported increased confidence among their technical staff. Robert had been right about Marcus's ability to bridge the gap between innovation and practical application. During one particularly successful presentation to a group of dealership owners, Marcus realized that his years of explaining complex problems to worried customers had prepared him perfectly for this role. He could take the most sophisticated engineering concepts and translate them into language that made sense to people who just wanted their cars to work reliably. The financial security that came with his new position allowed Marcus to focus on being the father he'd always wanted to be. Emma took violin lessons now, her small fingers finding their way around the strings with the same precision Marcus brought to mechanical problems. She joined the science club at school and showed her projects to him with excitement, explaining concepts that amazed him with their complexity. "Look, Daddy," she said one evening, demonstrating a simple electric circuit she'd built. "It's just like the cars at your work, but smaller." Marcus marveled at how naturally she understood the principles that had once seemed so foreign to him. With Sarah's artistic sensibility and his mechanical intuition, Emma was developing into a child who could see both the beauty and the logic in how things worked. 6 months into his new role, Marcus received an assignment that would test everything he'd learned. Pacific Motors was launching their most ambitious project yet, a line of electric commercial vehicles designed for emergency services. The irony wasn't lost on him that he was now helping to design the next generation of the same type of ambulance he'd once repaired in his parking lot. The project brought unique challenges. Emergency vehicles needed reliability that went beyond what typical consumer cars required. They had to function perfectly in extreme conditions, maintain their electrical systems under constant stress, and be repairable quickly when problems arose. Marcus threw himself into the work with passion that surprised even him. He spent weeks riding with paramedics, firefighters, and police officers, understanding how they use their vehicles and what kinds of problems they encountered. He visited emergency dispatch centers and maintenance facilities, learning about the real-world constraints that academic engineers sometimes overlooked. The key insight, Marcus explained to his team during one brainstorming session, is that emergency vehicles can't be treated like regular cars. They need redundant systems, simplified diagnostic procedures, and components that can be replaced quickly by mechanics working in less than ideal conditions. His recommendations led to design changes that would make the new ambulances more reliable and easier to service than anything currently on the market. The backup electrical systems he proposed could keep critical medical equipment running even if the main battery failed. The diagnostic interface he designed would allow paramedics themselves to identify simple problems without waiting for a mechanic. As the project neared completion, Robert invited Marcus to lunch at the same diner where they'd first discussed the job offer. Both men had changed over the past year. Marcus carried himself with new confidence, while Robert seemed energized by the success of his decision to bring an outsider into Pacific Motors' leadership team. "I have some news," Robert said after they'd ordered. "The board of directors has approved the expansion of your department. We want to open regional training centers in 5 major cities, all under your supervision." Marcus felt the familiar flutter of excitement mixed with apprehension that had become his response to new challenges. A year ago, the idea of managing a multi-city operation would have seemed impossible. Now it felt like the natural next step in a journey he was still learning to embrace. "There's something else," Robert continued, pulling an envelope from his jacket. "This came addressed to you at the company, but it looks personal." Marcus opened the envelope to find a handwritten letter from the female paramedic who had been in the ambulance that day. She'd tracked him down through Pacific Motors' public relations department. "Dear Mr. Thompson," the letter began, "I wanted you to know that the man you helped save that day has become something of a legend in our department. But more importantly, I wanted to thank you for showing me that there are still people in the world who help others without thinking about what's in it for them. You've inspired me to be better at my job and more generous in my personal life. Thank you for reminding me why I became a paramedic in the first place." Marcus folded the letter carefully, feeling the weight of how one spontaneous act of kindness had created ripples he was still discovering. As they walked back to their cars, Robert clapped him on the shoulder. "You know, Marcus, saving my life. That day was just the beginning. What you've done since then has affected thousands of people. The mechanics you've trained, the customers whose cars run better, the emergency responders who will have better equipment because of your insights." That evening, as Marcus helped Emma with her homework at their kitchen table, he reflected on the unexpected path his life had taken. The scared single father who had once worried about paying Emma's school fees had become a corporate executive, whose decisions influenced an entire industry. But the most important thing hadn't changed at all. Emma still looked at him with the same love and trust she'd always shown, still asked him questions about how things worked, still fell asleep feeling safe and secure in their home. He had gained so much, but he had never lost sight of what mattered most. 2 years had passed since Marcus first walked through the doors of Pacific Motors, and the company was unveiling its most significant achievement yet. The main auditorium buzzed with excitement as journalists, industry leaders, and government Officials gathered for the launch of the new emergency vehicle line that Marcus had helped develop. Emma, now 10 years old and more confident than ever, sat in the front row wearing her best dress. She had insisted on attending what she called Daddy's big day, and Marcus had been unable to refuse her request. Her presence calmed his nerves as he prepared to address the largest audience of his career. Robert took the stage first, his voice carrying easily through the packed auditorium. Ladies and gentlemen, today marks a revolution in emergency vehicle technology. But before I introduce our new ambulance and fire response vehicles, I want to tell you a story about how innovation sometimes begins in the most unexpected places. Marcus felt his heart racing as Robert began recounting the events that had brought them together. The audience listened intently as they learned about the broken ambulance, the desperate paramedics, and the mechanic who didn't hesitate to help a stranger. That mechanic is now our Director of Service Innovation, Robert continued, and his insights have transformed not just our emergency vehicle program, but our entire approach to customer service. Please join me in welcoming Marcus Thompson. When Marcus walked to the podium, he caught sight of several familiar faces in the audience. Tom Bradley from the parts store had driven over for the event, along with Mrs. Henderson and several other former customers. Even the paramedic who had written him the letter was there, having been invited as a special guest. 3 years ago, Marcus began, his voice steady despite his nerves, I thought I knew exactly what my life would look like. I ran a small repair shop, picked up my daughter from school every day, and fixed whatever problems people brought to my door. I never imagined that one broken ambulance would change everything. He paused, looking out at the sea of faces before him. But that's the thing about life. It has a way of presenting us with opportunities disguised as emergencies. When those paramedics pulled into my parking lot that day, I didn't see a chance to advance my career or meet influential people. I saw human beings who needed help, and I did what felt right. The audience was completely silent now, hanging on his every word. Marcus glanced at Emma, who gave him an encouraging smile. The vehicles we're introducing today represent more than technological advancement, he continued. They represent the understanding that innovation means nothing if it doesn't serve real people in real situations. Every feature we've included, every system we've designed comes from listening to the men and women who risk their lives to save others. As Marcus spoke about the new ambulance's capabilities, their extended battery life, simplified maintenance procedures, and backup systems that could keep critical equipment running under any circumstances, he realized how far he'd traveled from that small repair shop. Yet in many ways he was doing exactly the same thing he'd always done, solving problems for people who needed help. The demonstration that followed showcased vehicles that looked like glimpses into the future. The new ambulances were sleeker and quieter than their predecessors, with interiors designed around the needs of both patients and medical personnel. The fire response vehicles featured equipment that could operate longer and more efficiently than anything currently available. But Marcus was most proud of a feature that wasn't immediately visible to the audience. Hidden beneath the hood of each vehicle was a diagnostic system so intuitive that emergency personnel could identify and address simple problems themselves, reducing downtime and ensuring that help would always be available when needed. After the formal presentation, Emma rushed to his side, her eyes shining with pride. Daddy, you were amazing. Everyone was listening to every word you said. Marcus knelt down to her level, straightening the small necklace she wore, a gift from Sarah that she saved for special occasions. What did you think of the ambulances? Sweetheart, I think Mommy would be proud, Emma said simply. You're helping people just like she always said you would, but now you're helping lots and lots of people. As the reception continued around them, Marcus reflected on the journey that had brought him to this moment. The scared single father, who had once worried about making ends meet, was now leading a team of engineers and trainers across multiple states. The man who had felt overwhelmed by the idea of working for a corporation was now being courted by other companies who wanted to replicate Pacific Motors' success. But perhaps the most significant change was in how he saw himself. The confidence that had grown slowly over the past 2 years had transformed him from someone who reacted to problems into someone who anticipated and prevented them. He no longer saw himself as just a mechanic who had gotten lucky, but as a leader whose unique perspective could make a real difference in the world. Later that evening, after the last guests had departed and the auditorium had been cleared, Marcus found himself alone with Robert in the executive conference room. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, they could see the lights of the Pacific Motors facility stretching into the distance. "You know," Robert said, loosening his tie, "when I offered you this job, I thought I was repaying a debt. I never expected you to exceed every expectation I had." Marcus poured himself a cup of coffee from the service in the corner. "I still feel like I'm learning something new every day. Sometimes I can't believe this is really my life." "The board wants to promote you again," Robert said. "Vice President of Customer Experience, overseeing all aspects of how Pacific Motors interacts with the people who buy our vehicles. It would mean a significant salary increase and stock options that could make you independently wealthy." The offer was staggering, representing a level of success that would have been unimaginable just a few years earlier. Yet Marcus found himself thinking not about the money or the prestige, but about Emma and the example he wanted to set for her. "Can I ask you something, Robert?" Marcus said. "When you started Pacific Motors, did you ever imagine it would become this big?" Robert laughed. "Honestly, I just wanted to build cars that didn't pollute the air my children would breathe. Everything else happened because we stayed focused on that mission, even when it would have been easier to compromise." "That's what I want Emma to understand," Marcus said. "That success isn't about the size of your office or the number on your paycheck. It's about using whatever talents you have to make things better for other people." As they prepared to leave, Robert handed Marcus a small wrapped package. "This is from the entire executive team, but I wanted to give it to you privately." Inside was a simple brass nameplate, but instead of his corporate title, it read, "Marcus Thompson, the mechanic who changes lives." "We had it made because we never want you to forget where you came from," Robert explained. "Your willingness to help that day didn't just save my life. It reminded all of us why we do this work in the first place." Driving home through the quiet streets, Marcus thought about the nameplate sitting on the passenger seat beside him. Tomorrow he would place it on his desk, right next to Emma's latest drawing, a picture of herself and her father standing in front of an ambulance, with the caption, "My daddy helps people," written in her careful handwriting. The house was dark when he arrived, but he could see the glow of Emma's nightlight through her bedroom window. He found her sleeping peacefully, surrounded by books about science and engineering that she'd checked out from the library. On her nightstand was the model car Robert had given her during their first visit to Pacific Motors, now worn smooth from being carried everywhere as a good luck charm. As Marcus tucked the blanket around his daughter's shoulders, he whispered, a promise that Sarah would never hear but that he knew she would understand. He would continue to work hard, continue to grow, and continue to use every opportunity that came their way to build a better future. But he would never forget that the most important job he would ever have was being Emma's father, and that the success in the world meant nothing if he lost sight of the love that had motivated every choice he'd made. Outside, the city slept peacefully, protected by emergency responders driving vehicles that Marcus had helped design, vehicles that would serve reliably, because a mechanic had once stopped what he was doing to help a stranger in need. It was a reminder that every act of kindness creates ripples that extend far beyond what we can see, touching lives in ways we may never fully understand. The small repair shop was gone now, replaced by the shopping complex the city had planned. But the spirit of that place, the willingness to help others regardless of the inconvenience, the understanding that people matter more than profits, lived on in everything Marcus did, a legacy that would continue long after the last ambulance he'd helped design had served its final call.